Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Career Coach podcast. Today, we are talking about how to brag your way into your dream job with Brittany Burton from the Resume House. Welcome, Brittany. It is so exciting to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Kendall.
It's going to be so fun. I think it's been interesting. If you guys don't follow Brittany on social media, it's at the Resume House. She has so much good content, and I felt like when we met for the first time, just like instant click. There was that we're on
Yes,
the same page, and I love that. So,
yes.
uh, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, your background, kind of what you do, get them up to speed?
Yeah, so I went to school for strategic communications, which other people call PR. And I had a class where I had a project about designing a beautiful resume, and it was the best project I can remember in school. I felt so inspired. My professor said it was the best one anyone had ever done. And so that was what kind of started my love affair for resume writing and design. Most people think, oh God, that sounds like getting a root canal to me, but I love it. And so I was just kind of helping family and friends for quite a few years. And they were like, this has really gone well for me. Maybe you should help other people. And so for the last 8 years, I've gotten to have my hands on easily 350 resumes, maybe more over the course of my career. And now I've created a course teaching people exactly how to do what I've been doing because I believe that that is a life skill that we should
Mhm.
all have, especially as we go and we journey through our career. You never know what's going to happen. If you have that skill set, you'll be ready for whatever comes your way. And so that is why I absolutely love what I get to do. It's
That's
amazing.
that's awesome. And I think when you and I spoke the other day, we both kind of like nerded out over resumes.
Yes.
Like this is our love language is like resume writing and how do you phrase things. And so if you're listening to this and making your resume does feel like you're getting a root canal, feel free to reach out to Brittany, take her course. But also, we're going to share a bunch of great tips today about how you can use your resume in a way that's going to help you land really whatever your dream job is. So, if we think about all of the resumes that you've seen, what are some things that you look for when you're creating resumes, when you're helping people rewrite their resumes? Like, what are you trying to accomplish?
So I think everybody needs this sort of mindset shift when it comes to their resume. A lot of people, like I've seen hundreds of resumes, people coming to me to fix them. So obviously, when they send them to me, they are not in good shape and they know that. But what I see is that they've just kind of listed off a bunch of responsibilities and they give so much detail about jobs they had 20 years ago and all sorts of things like that. And I look at it and say, no, this is a marketing document and we are selling you. And you're not going to get what you want with a list, a laundry list of all the things that you've ever done. That's not strategic. That doesn't stand out. There are probably 20 people in that pile of resumes right behind yours with the same experience. So, what my goal always is to show someone how they stand out. Why are they unique? What is I call it their secret sauce that we have to infuse into their resume. It
Mhm.
has to be obvious what their unique value is and where they're going. If I look at your resume and I have no idea what kind of job you want, that's a problem.
Yeah. And I love that you phrased it as this is a marketing document and we're selling you. I love that turn of phrase because that is, I think, the biggest misconception of resumes. And I see this a lot of times when people are advocating for themselves within their own jobs, right? Which is kind of more of the side that I coach on.
Yeah.
And they'll say things like, oh, well, I did this task. And I'm like, no, you impacted the organization by driving increased revenue and decreasing risk. Like you have to be able to articulate the impact of what you're doing and why it's valuable. And so I can easily see how that's marketing yourself, that's selling yourself to your boss.
Yes.
And then we get to the resume and people are like, oh, well, I want to prove that I did all these things. I just want them to know that like I can check off everything on their JD, on their job description. And the reality is that a hiring manager doesn't care if you can do anything on the job description. They care like, are you teachable? Are you interesting? Do you have unique value and a secret sauce?
Yeah.
Like, do I want to work with you every day? And so I love that, like, to your point, that mindset shift, right?
Yes.
How would you make a marketing document about you versus a
Yeah.
resume list of what you've done?
Yes. I think people assume that your resume is the same as your job application, which is why we get frustrated when we go to apply for something and they ask you for your resume and then they have you put in the online application every job you've ever had, what years you were there, what did you do? And you're like, I just gave you this in my resume. But if that's all your resume is, you did your resume wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's not every job you've ever had and all the details, because that's not strategic.
Yeah. And it's, it's very related. Every interview I've ever had, probably you as well, the first thing they say is, I've seen your resume. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your background? And that either means A, they didn't read the resume, or they're looking for something different. But what everybody I interview does is they go, well, once upon a time, I went to college and I studied this. And then they go through their resume like in order. And so something that I'm always pitching clients, which it seems like very closely relates to this, is I don't want you to tell them what's on your resume. They can go back and look at your resume. I want you to tell them what you're good at.
Yeah.
You can highlight a few places that you've done that, but what are you good at? And I love your take that a resume should be the same way. What are you good at? What's your unique value? What's that secret sauce? Then tell me some ways that you've done that in the past. But that's not as important as like selling them on basically what they're buying with their salary.
Absolutely. Hiring someone is a big investment and they take it seriously. So you've got to take it seriously. In fact, I was talking with a friend of mine who she probably looks through 400 resumes a week and she prints every single one of them off. I physically saw her stack. She's like, I know I'm old school, but I like to look at them on paper. And she said, if you don't grab my attention in 3 seconds, I'm moving on. I was like, oh, dang. When I tell that to students, people who take like a training with me, I say, you have 3 seconds. And they're like, good grief. Like, they're not going to get anything in 3 seconds. But it's true. You have to stand out quickly. They don't have time. So what about you is not like everybody behind you and ahead of you?
Yeah.
And that's hard for people.
It is, because I feel so many, we just don't know ourselves well.
Yes.
Right? We go through the motions a lot of the time. And it's interesting, Forbes published an article, this probably would have been middle of last year, and they said the average recruiter, it's not the hiring manager who we think spends even less time, but the average recruiter looks at a resume 6 seconds.
Yeah.
So to even get your screening call, you have to go through the hiring manager and the recruiter. The recruiter's looking at it for 6 seconds. Hiring manager's looking at it 3. You better be snazzy.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me tell you, Kendall, most of them, before you even read a word, it looks like chaos. Just the look of it, right? Or it's so boring that your eye doesn't even know where to go. And that's where I think I've always nerded out when we talk about nerding out. I nerd out about resume design, and not in a way that's like the Canva stuff that you see where you've got headshots and I'm going to rank all my skills with stars and, that's fine, but I don't recommend that. But it does have to make an impression when you open it. It can't look like the rest of them because you want to draw them in. You want to get them to read something.
Yeah.
And if it looks like chaos, they're not going to read it. And
you want that balance between like being good for ATS, being good for the algorithm, but a manager wanting to look at it, right? My biggest pet peeve as a hiring manager, right? I've never been in HR. I've specialized in managing people. My biggest pet peeve, we're going to go in a couple now. 2 biggest ones. 1, your resume is like just black and white, same font, same size, all the way down.
Yep.
I don't know what to do with that. And the second thing is if it's more than 2 pages long, right? A lot of people say more than 1 page long. I'll give you a little slack if you go onto that second page. But if you send me a 9-page resume, which I've gotten, you're out. You don't know how to communicate effectively. That's what that just taught me. Bottom of the pile. So I'm curious, so many resumes that you look at, like what are your biggest pet peeves? What are the things you see that you're like, oh no, we're not going to do that?
Yeah. So a few things that have stood out to me over the years. 1, I had a guy come to me with a 70-page resume. It was, in fairness, it was more of an academic CV, right? But still, no one ever would have read that even in that side, in that realm of the world.
Okay, quick side note for everybody who's listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and cannot see my face. Literal jaw drop at the idea of anyone sending a 70-page CV to anyone for any reason, right? Like
I don't care if you're in academia or not. Now, mind you, he was a neurosurgeon. So with years of teaching, and published articles, all these things.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, even in academia, no one's reading that many pages. That's a book.
Yeah. Well, and if they care that much, they'll Google you. Right?
Yes.
Like, if we get to that point, you should be Googleable and they'll
Yes.
Google you, right? No, but
Yes.
that's just so funny because I'm sitting here and I'm just looking at Brittany thinking like, if I what would I even do?
I
I
had
don't
to
know.
keep charging him more.
Uh, you'd have to just to can we pare it down? Can we pare it down? It would take months to get it to 2 pages.
Yeah, I don't think I realized what I had gotten myself into when I gave him an initial quote. And by the end of it, I think it had tripled. And he was so gracious and he was the nicest man. He wanted to break out of that academic work and brain surgery and all that and work in medical devices. So he knew that wasn't going to work. He knew that a medical device company was not going to hire him with a 70-page CV, which is why he came to me. So he was great. But oh man, that was the biggest project I have ever taken on. And I would never do it again.
I'm sure this is one of those life lessons as a coach where you're like, I want to help people. I don't want to help everybody. That might be a bit much in the future.
Nope. Nope.
But sorry, we went on a segue. So you were saying, so one of your biggest pet peeves is obviously super long resumes. What other ones do you
Super
have?
long road. If you find me on Instagram, you will see that I have received a lot of flack for this in the last week, but I absolutely hate when people start their bullet points with the words responsible for. And it's not that I hate the word responsible, although if you ask my personal opinion on responsible, I think it sounds like what a baby, like I'm babysitting kids, I'm responsible for these kids. Like it just gives the wrong connotation to me. But the real issue is that every time I've seen someone come to me with their resume with that listed a million times, all that comes after it is like 12 different tasks that they didn't know how to create a full complete thought about, and so they just listed them all together. And I'm like, no, because here's what that doesn't do. It shows no impact, no context, and it's very passive. And
Yeah.
a passive resume overall is a pet peeve of mine. Another really weird pet peeve of mine. It's not weird. I know it's right, but it's weird that I focus on this. Is I don't know why people put like their GPA when they graduated college like 12 years ago. Guys, no one cares anymore. No one really cared the year you graduated, but they definitely don't care now.
I always laugh because the first thing I do with almost every resume I'm sent is I move education to the bottom. Everybody
Yes.
always has it at the top. So I have a master's degree. I have 3 undergrads. That's great. No one cares. So let's bump it down if they really care. If they're a hiring company that cares, right? There are some, right? I'm going to use like Deloitte as a great example. Most Deloitte consultants have a master's degree, right? They have
Yeah,
special programs for that. They're going to scroll to education and they're going to look for it because that's a checklist item for them. But every other hiring company, if you've only got 3 seconds, you don't want the only thing they can see about you is that you had a 3.45 12 years ago.
no. I had one client who wanted to put on it, and I mean, he literally would put it back if I took it off. He wanted it on his resume that he passed the I can't think it was the CPA exam on the first try in like 1985, and I'm like, I your resume speaks how smart you are. That just makes you look like a jerk. Like your ego is so big that you had to put that in there from 35 years ago. Like no.
Yeah,
Those are my pet peeves.
I love it though because it's all in fun, it's all in jest. If you're listening to this and you're
Yeah.
like, but I have my GPA on my resume or my
Oh
education
yeah.
is at the top. These are really common mistakes, right? What
You're
Brittany and I are
normal.
discussing, we see them all the time. I
Yeah.
think the mind shift that goes with this is if you think of it as a marketing doc, if you think of it as a way to lure in the hiring manager and make them want to talk to you, those aren't the most valuable things in your background. They're just not,
Right.
right? And so it becomes so much about what impact you can drive for a company,
Yep.
right? And so something that you say a lot, one of your kind of taglines is like infusing your unique value into your resume. So how do you guide clients to do that? What does infusing their resume with their unique value really look like?
Well, something that I teach is that your secret sauce is made up of a few different things, and it's up to you how much of it you want to put in. But people need direction, right? You tell them what's your unique value, and they're going to look at you like, I don't know. So I have a few questions that I want them to ask themselves. Things like, when I'm at work, time flies by when I'm doing this, or when I'm working on this kind of project. Or around the office, everybody knows me as the go-to for this, and they come to me every time because they know I'm the person who gets this done, or who knows how to deal with this client, or you know what I mean? Those
Love those.
things that what else do I ask them? Like, what is it that just like sets you on fire? And
Hmm.
that you're like, if I could do this all day, every day, that's what I would do if I could. We
Yeah,
all know that we have menial tasks no matter what job that you have, but like, what is
absolutely.
that one thing? I had someone as an example recently. I was working with her. She like has a top security clearance. She works for Collins Aerospace. She's in defense, like going to that next level. She's so impressive. And I was talking to her on the phone, and I was like, okay, so what is it about you that is different from all the other people? And even as accomplished as she is, right? She has two master's degrees, she's in process for her PhD. They're all from like Ivy League schools. I mean, just
Hmm.
blew me away, right? And she just couldn't think of anything. And we got to talking a little while later, and she goes, "Yeah, well, I know how to work in this niche and this niche and this niche and this niche, and most people are only in one of those. And I've worked in all of them, and I know exactly how they all work together." And I was
Yeah.
like, "That's it. That's
Yeah.
you. That's what we
That's
got to
the
lead
unique
with."
value. Yeah.
Yes.
I often will
Um,
ask people like what is your biggest accomplishment so far in your career and why is it your biggest to you? Right? Because it's not just about what great work you've done. Everybody's delivered something that they're proud of. Everybody's done something that they think is cool, right? In whatever your space. See, I come from like a data science, data analytics background. The things I think are cool, somebody in marketing would not think are cool, right?
Fair,
So,
fair.
but we've all got those types of projects. However, the big differentiator is like, why did you feel that one had so much impact? Is it because
Hmm.
you worked with lots of different teams and you got along really well with them? Was it because you were able to deliver on a really compressed timeline? Was it because you had, a smaller budget, but you were able to deliver this big project that led to all this revenue? Like, what was it about it that makes that your biggest accomplishment? That's going to
Yeah.
tell me so much more about you and why you do the things you do than you telling me every project you've ever worked on.
Yep. In fact, that's the first module inside my course, is getting them to the root of that through asking themselves questions. And I give them questions to ask other people, because let's face it, like you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, some of us are not great at self-evaluation. I mean,
Hmm.
I've taken the Enneagram test like 10 different times, and I still don't know if I'm a 3-wing 2 or a 2-wing 3. I really still don't know. I get a different answer every time. So I am one of those people where sometimes I do find self-evaluation really difficult. But I say this is the module where you build the foundation. When you figure these things out about yourself, I truly believe everything flows from there on your
Yeah.
resume. And where I tell people, because you asked me this earlier and I wanted to get to it, where I tell people to infuse it is first and foremost in that brief but powerful summary that they need at the top of their resume. Like you said, you don't want your education or your current job as the very first thing someone sees. Like, hit them
Hmm.
with like a few sentence miniature kind of cover letter, if you will, where you are just telling them exactly why you are unique, what your secret sauce is. And I have a whole formula for that, because even just saying that to some people, I can see their eyes glaze over like, yeah, lady, I'm not a writer. And I get that. But if you can figure that out, what it is about you, and it's not just what others think of you, it's truly what you think of yourself.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that it's such a good point because being in this industry is always interesting. People have differing opinions. People like to do things different ways. I get it. It happens. And there's been kind of a movement lately away from executive summaries. Right? People are like, "Oh, we don't want executive summaries. Just get to it." You have to have an executive summary for me, right? And those 2 sentences, those 3 sentences max, they should tell me everything I need to know about why you're going to be a good fit. right? Your
Yep.
job history should support that. It should
Hmm.
tell me more about how you've done that, but that should tell me, like, what skills do you bring to the table? What do you do that other people don't? Why are you important to me? And I think a lot of times it gets overlooked, right? I see a
I
lot of
agree.
summaries, I'm sure you do too, where people will say, I have a passion for cooking classes and walking the beach, and I enjoy, right? And not necessarily extracurriculars like that every time, but they'll talk about things they like. Like, don't tell me things you
Yeah.
like. Tell me what you do. Tell me what you're good at. And I
Yeah.
love that idea of like reframing that that is going to be like the most important, like almost punch in the gut when you're working on that
Yes.
resume.
Yes. Oh, I haven't heard him. No one has told me to get rid of that, but I wouldn't. I absolutely wouldn't. I call it a profile. Some people call it a summary. What I always, you said pet peeves earlier. I could think of a million. No, don't have an objective. That's a
Yeah.
hard pass from me.
Yeah, you got to tell me about you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I,
I
your
think it's so
objective is to get this job. Like, obviously.
understood. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Um, no, and I love that because I think that it really is it's hard. Resumes are really challenging, right? The job market right now is very volatile, right? You've
Yes.
got 800 applicants for many jobs in the first hour or two. And I tell this story often, but I used to work for a very large company, one of the largest banks in the world. And I posted a job once. I had 700 applicants in an hour, and they shut the rec down. 1 hour, rec was shut down. And of those 700 applicants, I was sent 5 resumes to look at as the hiring manager,
Whew.
right? So now let's say maybe 100 passed ATS, 100 passed the algorithm. Then the hiring manager pulls 20 and thinks, oh, these aren't very good. Or the recruiter pulls 20, says, I don't think these are very good. I'll send these few to her and see if she likes them, and we can go from there. I only ever saw those 5 resumes, and I hired one of those people, right? So when you are applying for these jobs, it can be really discouraging, right? Because you're like, well, I'm going against
Yeah.
all these numbers, all these things. But I can tell you as a hiring manager who's looked at thousands of resumes, 99% of them suck. So if you can make one that looks
Yes.
really good, it doesn't matter
Yes.
if there are 700 applicants, right?
Yes.
I'm going to want to look at you. I'm going to want to talk to you. I'm going to want to know what you're good at. And so
Yes.
while I know it can be discouraging, it can be frustrating, it can be really hard when you're applying and you're not hearing back. I think it
Hmm.
is really important to keep in mind, though, that you need to be differentiated
Yep.
from your competitors, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah,
And
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And what I try to tell people is you don't have to be the world's best writer, the world's best designer. You just got to be 10% better than, that 750 people behind you. And
yep.
it just takes a little bit of education. Again, differentiating yourself, learning how to brag about yourself. Our moms always taught us when we were kids, don't brag, don't brag. This is the time to brag,
Yes.
if ever there's a time.
And I think that that's a topic, it's a good one for us to kind of close on. So when we talk about bragging your way to your dream job, right, which is the slogan that I have assigned to you for this, which is how are we going to brag about ourselves enough to get that dream job interview, to land that dream job? Where do you see people struggle? What advice do you give them? What does bragging on that resume really look like to help them secure the best position for them?
Yeah, so if we move past that summary profile, whatever jargon we want to use, I mean, obviously that's where I'm telling people to put the most of their unique value right there. But when you get, and this is my favorite tip for people, when you get into your jobs and, bullet points, and Kendall, I think you would agree with me, bullet points, please. I know everybody has differing opinions, please bullet points. But while it is important to tell somebody generally what your role is, especially if your title does not make it obvious, what I tell people to do is have like a subheader where it says company role and then list just a couple of things about your overall role. Still start them with an action verb and get in some impact, don't make them lame. But
Mm-hmm.
after that, you need a subheader that says achievements or accomplishments and spend the majority of your real estate on that if you can. And some people are like, oh, I can't even think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Some great sources that I can think of. Well, number one, if you're tracking any kind of KPIs or your performance reviews, things like that, go back to what did I brag to my boss about when I was trying to get a raise? Or Something I tell people to do is if you know you're going to leave your job in the next year, start a Google Doc and just as you accomplish something or you work on a project that goes well or you change a process and it makes everybody so much more efficient. Write that down. Like have
Mm-hmm.
a running document to pull from when you're ready to start applying. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to be that I increase profits by 50%. I think we think of those as like, it has to be the biggest thing ever, or I shouldn't put it on there. No, just show some sort of way that you did something there for that company that someone else, even with your same job title, didn't do.
Yeah.
That's where that comes into play. But I think separating it out I know nobody can see me right now, but if one says company role, you got a couple bullets, accomplishments, then that way their eyes know where to go. We were talking about layout earlier. They
Mhm.
only are looking for a few seconds. Make them look at your accomplishments. Don't bury them.
Yes. And it's true when it comes to bragging about ourselves, because I think we have a tendency to say, well, that was my job, right?
Mm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to give this example. I've talked about this before, and I'm sorry to reiterate it, but still think it's like the most hysterical story in my professional career. Is I had somebody who wanted help with a resume, and they sent it to me, and the first 3 bullets said returned calls, answered emails, attended on time. And I thought it
No.
was a joke because that's absurd to be listed on your resume. Like that's not even a job accomplishment. That's just like a common courtesy. And I feel bad if that individual happens to listen to this. We ended up getting your resume in a good spot, I promise. But when you think of how you brag on yourself, right? When you think of how you boost yourself, it's not just the stuff you're doing, but it's how that adds value to your stakeholders, right? That's
Yep.
how you are leaving your mark. And if you think about that, a lot of people seem to struggle with this, but this could be you improved the employee experience, you improved your client experience, you improved client retention, employee retention, you mitigated a risk,
Yep.
you prevented losses, you increased
Mm-hmm.
revenue, you made something available that allows for data-driven decision making. You know, all of these things, these are all impacts as opposed
Yep.
to hey, here's tasks. We touched on that at the beginning, right? But when it comes to bragging your way into a job, it's not just, hey, I can do fundamental tasks.
Right.
Hey, I can have an impact in your team.
That's
And
right.
I had a leader I worked with once who used to say, uh, I can train anybody I grab off the street to do a job. I need people who are going to add value. And that's what you recruit for. You recruit for value, not for a job. And I think that distinction of what is your value, how do you brag about that, that's what sets you apart, right? And the same is true once you get into interviews, right? Everything that
Yep.
you're mentioning about the resume, then you get in front of the hiring manager, goes the same way. Impress them
Yep.
in the first 5 seconds, know your value, be able to brag about yourself, right? These are lessons that carry on even beyond filling out the physical resume.
And if you're doing all this work on your resume, I promise you'll be more prepared for your interview because
Yes.
you're going to be thinking that way. Your mindset is going to change and you're going to be more prepared to talk about the projects that you've done, to talk about the processes you've improved, to talk about, the clients that you brought in, whatever it may be. If you're doing that critical work for your resume, you're ready for the interview, in my opinion.
Yeah. And
It translates.
I'll always tell people if you're on an interview, I spend like 15 minutes before every interview, I'll reread the JD of the job I'm applying for and I'll reread my own resume.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I have things that connect? Where do I have things that
Yep.
make sense so that when I walk into it, it's fresh in your mind and you're ready to talk about it? Because it's easy to
Mm-hmm.
forget, right? I
It
can't tell you
is.
what I had for breakfast yesterday. It's gone.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I need a refresher. I need to be ready. And then once
Yes.
you walk into that room and they're going to feel that confidence. They're going to feel that preparedness.
You are so, so, so right. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yeah.
So it's such a great conversation that we're having. You're bragging your way into your job. I think this applies into so many different areas. We talked about your resume, your interview. It also talks about once you're in that job, how do you talk to your boss about the work that you're doing? How do you articulate it?
Yes.
Right? This is a skill that you're building, this skill of bragging, right? And it doesn't have to be a icky car salesman kind of brag, but it's your
Right.
value, it's your impact. And so I think this has been awesome, Brittany. I love talking about this with you, kind of diving in deep into like the nitty gritty. So What
Yeah.
parting words do you have for the listeners? Where can they find you? Let them know all your info.
So, knowing what kind of job market we have right now, right? We've already mentioned it. I think so many people are discouraged right now and they're feeling frustrated. And so, something I closed out a class I did on Wednesday night with, and I would love to say right now is regardless of whether or not you ever come to my page or work with me, I want you to know something from me. And that is you deserve to stand out. You deserve to be seen when you apply,
Mhm.
and you deserve for someone to see the value that you would bring to their company. I believe that with my whole heart. And I know that if you can do that, if you work on that, they the right opportunity will open up for you at the right time.
Yes, and I love that, and that's so true is you have to see yourself as deserving to put in the work,
Yeah.
put in the effort to get where you need to be. So, Brittany, it's been so great having you on the show. I'll put all of your information down below so that if people want to find you, they can get to your website, they can get to your social media. But I appreciate you having you on. I'm sure we'll talk more in the future, but thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Kendall.